Hi, and welcome everyone to Ethereal Encounters Unveiled. Today we are broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 on the Gulf Coast and 107.7 FM in beautiful New Orleans. Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's always a pleasure to be here with you today on this beautiful summer's day here in the States. And today we're having a show that I love very near and dear to my heart. So I'm so excited to be able to dive into it. But again, welcome to Ethereal Encounters Unveiled, and a big shout out to United Public Radio Network, as you just heard, and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, which you can listen to on FM radio, which is great. We have so many FM radio listeners. You can hear that on 105.3 FM on the Gulf Coast, 107.7 FM in New Orleans. If you're in one of the chats, because we do stream over 200 platforms, please be sure and join us in the chat. We love getting your questions and comments and seeing and feeling your presence. So there are mysteries that challenge what we believe about the world, and then there are mysteries that challenge what we believe about reality itself. And for centuries, the Vatican has stood at the center of some of humanity's deepest questions about God, the universe, consciousness, and the unknown. But what happens when those questions intersect with UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, secret encounters, ancient knowledge, and phenomenon that kind of blur the lines between the physical and the spiritual? Our topic today takes us into this fascinating and very controversial territory, and it's called the Vatican's Top Secret Alien Agenda, Secret Encounters, Forbidden Rituals, and Jesuit Astronomers in the Age of UFO Disclosure. And of course, that is taken from our guest today, who is Leo Zagami. He wrote the book with that exact title. He is the author and researcher whose work delves into the secret societies, hidden power structures, religious mysteries, esoteric traditions, and of course, the unexplained. He is an internationally renowned investigative journalist and has authored more than 20 books in several languages since 2009, and amongst two of them, they were bestsellers. With UAP disclosure becoming mainstream, Leo breaks down the religious and the occult implications in the Vatican's top secret alien agenda. This work exposes the Vatican's hidden long-term knowledge of extraterrestrial life, and for the first time reveals the secret UFO agenda, which has been managed by the Jesuits since the 1950s and threatens to reshape our deepest religious beliefs well beyond the boundaries of Catholic faith. So, enough jibber jabber, as I like to say. Let's dive right in and welcome Leo. Hi, Leo.
Pleasure meeting you and pleasure meeting your audience, which I know is very vast through many platforms and also on the radio. And I actually started many years ago on a Vatican-led radio station. So it's for me always great to get back to the radio.
Yes, we have so many radio listeners. Let me get your banner running up there, and folks can reach you at leozagami.com, and the links are all over the place if you look in the description of where it's posted. So we have some folks popping in the chat, and we always like to say hello to them. Hi, Kiera. Hi, Bandanarama. That's so cute, that name. Kiera says welcome, of course. And as people pop in, we will say hello to them. So, Leo, I'm sure you get asked this question all the time. You heard in the intro, you're obviously the author of so many books on the Illuminati, so many different topics. But could you just give us like some of your background summary for those folks that don't know who you are?
Well, I was born in Rome in 1970, in March 1970, at the Gemelli Hospital, which is also known as the Pope's Hospital. So my background is deeply connected to the Vatican from a very early age. When my mother started working with the Vatican media, I then went along and eventually ended up with my own show at the tender age of 13, and then went also along with another show for the TV, the local Vatican TV, which, by the way, the Catholic TV that I'm talking about, then later on became SAT 2000, which is the official TV station of the Bishop Conference of Italy. So very close to the Vatican from a very early age because of my family, Catholic on both sides, but also connected to the British aristocracy and the British royal family. So I started my career in the media, in the music business, but also working and getting to understand journalism with my mentor, Dino D'Arcangelo from La Repubblica, the late Dino D'Arcangelo, because he's no longer with us, who was a great journalist. And then I also, in 1993, started my path into Freemasonry and the various secret societies that we commonly refer to as the Illuminati, with the family friend Prince Aliata di Montereale. And from there on, I got initiated in various secret societies, various lodges of Freemasonry, and also belonged to the Canterbury Masonic Research Center, which no longer exists, but at the time was a very important center for the research of Freemasonry, whose patron was the Marquis of Northampton, who at the time was the Deputy Grand Master of the United Lodge of England. So yes, my experience is been until 2006 marked by being actually active within what we commonly define, like I said, as the Illuminati, and then I broke with that path because I no longer wanted to be associated with these people. And so then I started 20 years ago with my first blog, and then led to a series of books published in Japan, then in Italy, and then eventually in the United States of America and all over the world, where I've published and so many books. Because my intention was, first of all, to explain this pyramid of power, which I did with the Confessions of an Illuminati series, from volume 1 to volume 12. The last installment of my confession, which is volume 12, can also be read on its own, but is dedicated to the Jesuits, which I symbolically represent as the ones inside the all-seeing eye in the pyramid. And so we have, of course, then after that, a series of essays that started with the rise and fall of a Frankist monster, which is exposing Jeffrey Epstein and the most powerful Jewish sect in the world, the Sabbatean Frankists. And then now I went also into the topic of the Vatican top secret alien agenda. So it's like I closed the encyclopedia, we could call it like that, of the Illuminati, to then focus on specific topics that maybe needed digging a bit more. I had actually done a couple of previous essays that were successful. One of them was the Pope Francis, the Last Pope, and the other one, Invisible Master. Invisible Master in particular touches on this subject, the alien subject, or what we define as aliens, these interdimensional, extra-dimensional, or extraterrestrial creatures, however you want to define them. And Invisible Master was published just before I arrived here in the United States of America in 2019, where I was forced to relocate, and then eventually I, of course, embraced America as my new country, and I became naturalized in 2024. So I'm now American. I formally renounced to my Italian and European citizenship because I no longer believe Europe is a place where a journalist or a writer can freely write and and do the job I'm doing. So
Yeah, I agree
that's
with that.
unfortunate. That's
Yeah,
unfortunate, but that's unfortunate, but it's the truth. So
yeah,
we have to also realize that we are living in very different times where an
yeah.
Orwellian reality is manifesting more and more. And I think even George Orwell in 1984 couldn't imagine all the
No,
various
no.
shenanigans and control centers of power that
Yeah,
have been developed thanks to this new technology. But one
yeah.
of the things that probably George Orwell didn't know was that they started right from the 1930s in reverse engineering this non-human intelligence technology that
Mhm.
ended up in northern Italy for the first time with a UFO crash between the towns of Vergiate and Magenta. And of course, I have documents that were given to me by Roberto Pinotti, whose this book is dedicated to. He's a very big UFO expert who founded 60 years ago an organization, co-founded an organization called Centro Ufologico Nazionale, which gave me a lot of documents and also
Wow.
collaborates in what is now a yearly event within the Vatican at the St. Anne's Gate, where they have this yearly conference on UFOs or UAPs, as they call them today. So summarizing, I guess, and presenting myself, I guess I have defined everything in a nutshell.
Yeah, yeah. I see your birthday's on March 5th. Mine's March 4th. So we're both
Okay.
Pisces.
A good sign,
Good
especially
sign.
for
Yes,
these kind of topics.
absolutely. Absolutely. So out of the gate, I read your book. I'm like 75% done. I've taken tons of notes. I absolutely loved it, but it's very comprehensive and very deep. It contains the most amazing details and information that I've ever read on this particular topic. So kudos to you. Like the research, that you've done, you can tell is just beyond. I mean, you must have. And how long did it take you to write this book?
Well, I mean, my books have always been manifesting first in my head for many years, and then eventually I laid them down on paper. No, but you see, this book in particular is defined by my collaboration with my friend Roberto Pinotti, because he was my mentor on this topic.
Yeah.
When I went back to Italy for 10 years, I was living in Norway and I was forced because of the accusations of espionage to flee Oslo for Rome in 2008 and relocate then in Italy after 15 years because I have been living in London and then in Oslo. So some people don't know, but I'm half British. I know it doesn't sound like it, but I am. So what happened was that I relocated in Italy and I started a series of conferences on this specific topic of contactism, of UAP, of this reality that I thought it was very important to underline also the various connections with the esoteric world and so on. And Roberto Pinotti is also a Freemason. So we started a series of conferences in a castle, the castle of Roviano near Rome. And we had a lot of guests pouring in. Yeah, we even managed to have a Princess Corona Camaro from Japan, who co-wrote with me a couple of books that were published in Japan. And also we had the Grand Hierophant of the Mizraim Rite of Freemasonry, which is one of the only, to my knowledge, rites of Memphis and Mizraim recognized by regular lodges in the world. And on top of that, we had Giorgio Bongiovanni, who claims to have received the stigmata in Fatima. We had many experts, even from America, coming in. Now I don't remember all the names because we had a bunch of people. It was a lot of events that we created thanks to this to the possibility of using a castle. And this castle was not any castle, but was the castle that was originally offered to my family when I was 6 years old. Princess Brancaccio wanted us to purchase this castle, and she was actually the one who sold us our family home. So she wanted to give us this castle, but then for very little money, something like $25,000 or nothing.
Wow.
Problem is that you need to spend a few $1 million on a castle to actually keep it together. And so we didn't have that kind of money. And so eventually the castle passed on to the state. And at that time, I had the possibility of using it for these conferences. So it was an interesting experience, and I learned a lot on the topic. I had already, of course, learned on the topic from a direct experience I had, which I also talk about right at the end of the book, because, and you might have not still gone through it, because I left it at the end together with the interview. I made the exclusive interview with Roberto, because I didn't want it to distract, the reader from the main purpose of this book, which is, of course, exposing the Vatican involvement, which is very rarely discussed in UFO books. To my knowledge, there has not really been books that are focused on this specific topic, because it's, for a lot of people, especially in the UFO world, it's inconvenient, let's say, to expose the Jesuits, astronomers, the Vatican links. They more conveniently like to stay on their positions, because they often are actually working for the Vatican in one way or another, like I explained from the very beginning of this book. People like David Grush, people like Luis Elizondo, people like, of course, Dennis Sheehan, who was a former Jesuit novitiate, and many others who are part of this ongoing theater of disclosure, if we want to define it this way.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I want to ask you, because I want to go, slowly so people understand, because, we do have people that are very much into this topic and some that are just, delving into it. Did you suffer any consequences or like ramifications from exposing everything that, like, you denounced, I think, your citizenship in Italy, right?
Well, yeah, no, but I mean, I started this exposure work 20 years ago. And the very first exposure work I conducted was when I was living in Oslo, in Norway. And I lasted 2 years before I eventually, after threats received directly from the PST, which is like the FBI of Norway, threats literally to me, to my now ex-wife at the time, and eventually we arrived to the point that I had to flee Norway. What became my ex-wife gave up, of course, to the offers of the enemy, ended up then later on remarrying with a guy from the World Economic Forum of Klaus Schwab. And so I never saw my son again, basically, from that moment onwards. And so the sacrifice, as you can imagine, is a big sacrifice. I mean, it's not a little sacrifice. You get arrested, you get persecuted. And on top of that, once I relocated to Italy, as soon as the Vatican saw that I was publishing my first books in Japan, they actually offered me money and a position of influence and power in one of the knighthoods if I decided to not publish any longer in the Italian or English language. So it was like, it was incredible, and I describe this in my books, how the Vatican sent their own intelligence unit with a guy called Antonio Leonardo Montuoro, who worked for Marinelli, who used to be called the general by John Paul II, how I was pushed by then to accept this offer, but of course I didn't. In the end, I published my books, they became bestsellers, but that was, of course, the beginning of my downfall in Italy, because then they intervened, persecuting me, arresting me again, torturing me, and all kinds of things, even a poison attempt. I mean, I was poisoned which is really sad because it led to some big problems, which I still suffer to this day with my kidneys because of the poisoning.
Sure. Yeah. Where did this drive come from in you to, at a very young age, to expose all of these things? Like, where did this, was it a message, a download you received? Like, where did it initiate?
Well, it initiates, like I explained in at the end, actually, of this book, with a direct experience, an encounter of the fair kind with a blue orb, and followed later with a download of 44 pages, information which I wasn't really even able to understand initially. It took me some years of study.
Yeah. Yeah.
On the papers that I actually downloaded, channeled from these beings that claim to be almost permanently on top of the Vatican with their UFO squadron. Now, I know that that might sound weird, but I actually include a photo of a UFO squadron on top of St. Peter's in 1954, which was actually observed by Alberto Perego, this consul who worked as in the diplomatic world for the Vatican, and who then became the representative of George Adamski in Italy as these sightings were increasing. And so I think that at the time when I received this information, for a 23-year-old, it was a little bit too much. It was a little bit too much to understand, but also to take in. Then there were certain problems that happened after, because I had been initiated in the Illuminati of the New World Order by Prince Aliata di Montereale in 1993, and he was arrested after. And we're talking about a guy who had been in the White House with Bill Clinton at the inauguration, so he wasn't like a bandit or a criminal, but he was a guy who, of course, in a moment in which there was big changes with the fall of the Soviet Union, and all the equilibriums were changing, even in Italy, politically and Masonically speaking. So I ended up moving to London, middle of the 90s. I restarted also my career in the music business, and it's not easy for somebody who is into DJing, into music, to actually move to London, which is like, considered the capital of this kind of game. But I was lucky enough, and I was very successful. I started also my own record label there, and I got, of course, initiated and regularized into the United Grand Lodge of England, because my previous initiation wasn't recognized by the United Grand Lodge of England and by regular Freemasonry. Then I also got initiated at the end of the 90s in the Ordo Templi Orientis of Alistair Crowley at the Tabula Rasa Oasis, always in London. Then in Oslo, I got initiated in the Fraternità Rosicruciana Antigua. In the Memphis and Mizraim, I then received the 90 and 95 degrees, which is a very high degree for the Memphis and Mizraim system. And all this connected really to that original channeling from these beings, the Nomos from Sirius. And it was rather interesting that this Sirius thing kind of stayed there, present for years, even within my career in all these various occult organizations. It was like, thanks to that channeling and thanks to the information that I gathered, I was able also to rise through the degrees much faster than my colleagues. And so it was like almost like having, a Ferrari and being able to use it full hard in a situation in which, of course, I was still very young. But you have to understand that in the past, people like Adam Weishaupt founded the Illuminati in the middle of his 20s. I mean, people were not as they are nowadays, where they seem to still be incapacitated of leaving their home and their mother and father until a later age, like they do in Italy nowadays. It's becoming ridiculous. But also because of the present housing crisis and stuff, there is a lot of people that ended up They end up not having that independence from a very early age.
Yeah.
I was instead somebody who, from a very early age, wanted to be independent, wanted to also manifest this contact with these otherworldly beings. In 1993, I actually started the Magic of Abramelin the Mage, but I did it with the purpose of an occultist, not of a ufologist. So it really changed my perception even of the occult when I had this encounter, because it was a completely different thing from how, when you use a grimoire, especially the Magic of Abramelin the Mage is a 6 months ritual. And so it's very few people actually have the time and the patience to go through it. Even Aleister Crowley one time interrupted and then took it back on when he went in China, and suddenly he managed to complete the whole thing in China after having started in Boleskine in Scotland. So, but it took, of course, also for Crowley a moment of contact to realize that this Magic of Abramelin actually opens up to otherworldly beings. His contact came when he was in the Great Pyramid of Giza, and then through his wife, the channeling of what he claimed to be his new sacred text, the Book of the Law. For me, it was these 44 pages that I channeled, and that unfortunately, like I explained in the book, at one point they were stolen from me, and I also point on a specific direction on who stole them. But it was an experience, like I said, that changed my life and changed also the perspective on how to relate with these beings. Now, we know that there is, of course, a demonic element, a satanic element, something that mostly we can understand in the first chapter of this book, in which I define the various theological differences between the Orthodox, the Evangelics, and the Catholics, who seem to have this strangely embracing view of the whole thing since the 1950s onwards. And then often they even argue with the minority still, which in the Catholic Church is more conservative and argues that these are demonic beings. So not everybody agrees on the nature of these interdimensional or extraterrestrial beings. Now, when it comes also to the nature, extraterrestrial or interdimensional, I'm not, from my own personal experience, I understood that they are both. So they are extraterrestrial, but they're also interdimensional, because an advanced species has already mastered the multiverse reality. Something that we are attempting ourselves still as a primitive species compared to probably much more advanced species. However, it's also important to understand that the theme of good and evil is reflected all over the universe.
Absolutely.
And so we cannot simply embrace anything that comes out of a spaceship because we think that they might all be willing to help us out. We are talking about the possibility that there is also some very not only the fallen angels which have been discussed, or the Nephilim that we find in Genesis 6, or we find in the Book of Enoch. But like I said, at the universal level, there must be many realities. And the Vatican instead tends to be welcoming of all these realities, disregarding completely the demonic. I found that a little bit suspicious, and that's why I outlined that in my book.
Yeah. So your frame of thought is that they're both interdimensional as well as extraterrestrial, correct? That they're
Well, yes, from my own personal experience, these beings claimed to be from a distant place because we're talking about Sirius A, Sirius B, the whole thing that, of course, then I found out was related also to the communication to that tribe between Mali and Sudan, the Dogon tribe, which, of course, people now know a lot more about, because there has been studies that were conducted in the 1930s. This French anthropologists started to connect with this tribe, and eventually they led them to their true initiatic understanding of their symbolism, and of course their advanced understanding of astronomy and of Sirius. So that is really my experience, an experience which, of course, with this blue orb that claimed to be basically something that came from a mothership, and that, of course, was in itself sentient and was a form of non-human intelligence, which, when it manifests in front of you, when you're doing a specific ritual, then that really changes things. Especially when it's not the kind of entity that is communicating in a way like you will expect from an occult grimoire, but it was much more a military kind of situation in which the orb was behaving as they were literally, very disciplined in a squadron, communicating stuff which was technological, scientific, without all that sulfuric element, as they would say in Freemasonry.
Yeah.
And I had just finished my military service at the time. I was in the Italian Air Force. And so I had a direct experience of how to act as a military. And so I saw that this was a very disciplined being. And when I eventually downloaded these 44 pages, I in fact contacted the military intelligence in Italy, gave them the 44 pages to photocopy for 2 weeks. I told them, I want them back. And so these two friends of mine, who one in particular was involved with Giulio Andreotti. And Giulio Andreotti was a politician that, as I explain in this book, was very interested in the phenomenon. And at the same time, he was the real, allegedly the real master of the P2 Lodge, which, as we know, in Italy was also very close to the Vatican. And Giulio Andreotti had been prime minister several times after in his life he had various ministries, but he was convinced by Alberto Perego, who had that vision of the UFO squadron on top of St. Peter's, to embrace this study in a serious way. This was Alberto Perego. And so I thought that would be the ideal thing, to give my material, that this download of 44 pages to people who actually understood what they were about.
Sure.
And then I was almost forced to leave Italy due to the circumstances that arose in the following months between 1993 and 1994. So then I relocated in London after what happened there with the like I said, the arrest of Aliata di Montereale, the scandals, the things, and there was a lot of things that happened that led me to leave Italy. And so at that point, when I relocated in London, I kind of for a period of time, just left the whole thing to cool down. But it was like this thing was still there, present in my life as a very powerful experience, and I wanted to understand what it was. And so that's what really led me to then get initiated in other groups, because I had already been initiated into the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite and into the Illuminati, but I want to know more about the more esoteric, let's say, side of Freemasonry, which is not really something common. I mean, most Freemasons are just enjoying an experience that is no more than a little bit, it's like an esoteric version of the Rotary Club or the Lions. It's not like, so people have, sometimes in their imagination an idea. But then there is other groups that recruit from Freemasonry, and those are groups like the Ordo Templi Orientis or the fringe rites of Freemasonry, in particular the Memphis and Mizraim. And that was very interesting because years later, when we did those conferences and finally we managed to convince Giancarlo Seri, who is still the Grand Hierophant ad vitam of the Memphis and Mizraim, whose sovereign sanctuary is in Perugia, but is also being blessed in Russia because they also, on the continent of America, that doesn't have regular Memphis and Mizraim. They only have irregular groups here, fringe groups. In Europe, we have this regularized version. And during the conference in Roviano, he admitted that he found evidence of UFO activity even in his studies in Egypt himself when he went down there, and that also from his own personal experiences. And here, I mean, we're talking about a grandmaster of Freemasonry who doesn't really lightly say these kind of things like this,
Sure.
But to actually have him in front of an audience saying these things, it was quite something at the time.
Yeah, I'll bet. Let me ask you this: why is there a push to you mentioned, I think, right out of the gate, in like the first chapter, that J.D. Vance wanted to plan a trip to Area 51, but it never worked out. And now he's pushing all over podcasts that these are in fact demonic, and that Tim Burchett, you say, made a statement that even at the highest top level, secret activity is doled out only to those that have the power, and that the president himself may not be privy to this information. So why the secrecy? What is it? The military industrial complex that's running the show in terms of true disclosure? Did they know? Well, first let's dig into why the demonic push. Why are they pushing that these beings are demonic, like J.D. Vance?
Okay, first of all, we have to understand that part of these beings are demonic. I mean, it's not like the whole statement is wrong or erroneous, but of course we cannot limit ourselves and say they are only demonic and only evil, because that will be, I mean, we have a variety of species. The universe is a big reality. I mean, it will be like a little bit limiting ourselves to only define them as evil or inherently demonic, as some other. I mean, I was one of the first people who, when I came out on the scene 20 years ago, and I was coming from an experience directly, like I said, in various secret societies and so on. And I started with a blog and then a series of interviews. I got the attention of David Icke and other people. And I immediately said to David Icke that my take on these beings wasn't the lizard beings that, the Queen Mother didn't necessarily have a tail between her legs or a different physical reality, because I myself then would be part of, my DNA will have been different. Now, it's possible that we have some alien DNA. That's possible. Of course, there's been a lot of talk even recently about it. But regarding the actual lizard theory, I said that is more of a symbolic reality, because the genies of Islam, for example, can be described at times as having reptilian characteristics, and many other demonic entities are described with those kind of characteristics. But I would say that they have also an interdimensional reality. So I immediately focused on that interdimensional reality. But like I said, we shouldn't limit, because then you have angels and you have fallen angels. So you have two reality already when it comes down only to the category of angels. And then we can reflect, for example, there is those researchers who say, oh, well, I don't believe they are demons. Yes, okay, fine. But who tells you that they are not possessed by demons, just like we are at times? So, I mean,
that's a good point. That's a good point. I love in your book, you say, remember, God only knows with
I would like to, I saw an interesting thing here in the chat. I would like to reply, because some people,
I have it, with this one, I have it bookmarked. This one or
there was one in regards to the OTO. I was initiated in the OTO in England, and that was the OTO Caliphate, the one that has their headquarters here, started from California and then developed from, and then of course they are the ones that claim the copyright of Crowley. So in the 1990s, 2000, they ended up then taking over the show, just simply at a materialistic level. But I was then initiated in Oslo in the OTOA, which is the Ordo Templi Orientis Antigua, of Michael Berthiaud, which is another faction, which is closer to the Typhonian faction that somebody's mentioning. But I was never into the Typhonian OTO, though I have some good friends that still to this day that were into the Typhonian OTO. So just that, the initiation was, I met with the guy who was at the time the Grand Master of the OTO in Italy, Alberto Moscato. And then he died apparently of an heroin overdose, just in the style of Aleister Crowley. So that gives you an idea that these people sometimes are really pretty far out. But like I said, that my experience was abroad. In Italy, I was initiated instead into Freemasonry and the Illuminati by Prince Aliata.
Wow. Do you want to address this question too, or why about Southern African Freemasonry?
Well, I discussed, especially in Volume 8 of my Confessions, the connections with South Africa and South African Freemasonry. So if you want to have a look at it, you can go on Volume 8 of my Confessions. Like I said, in these 12 volumes, there is thousands of pages. It's been really like a long work to put them together. And when you asked me earlier on, when you start getting inspired, or how long it takes you to write a book, it takes often years. When I actually started the whole project for Illuminati Confessions, it was already in my mind for years. So when I started to see certain things happening within the actual initiatic system, the various orders I belong to. And I said, okay, I'm going to, first of all, inaugurate my website, which at the time was a blog on Squarespace. But apparently the censorship was immediate. And so after a couple of months, I was kicked out of Squarespace, which is quite unprecedented, because at the time it wasn't like just getting, kicked out of Facebook. Squarespace was a paying, you paid for it, So they actually gave me back even my money, but the whole thing was closed down, and so I had to move it then to an official website, which lasted also another couple of years. Then it was hacked when it became Leo Zagami. So I noticed from the very start that the internet is not a reliable source of information, because you can be hacked anytime.
Absolutely.
And then at that point, what are you going to do? You're going to lose your stuff, and also the attention span of people. When I started my exposure work between 2006 and 2008, which eventually led me with an accusation of espionage that lasted for 3 years, and a court case, and several $1,000s of lawyer bills along that. I mean, being arrested for espionage is a very serious thing. I got frozen all my assets and everything. So, in that case, the actual intelligence service, the PST in Norway, threatened me and they did it. It's better that you close down your website. The actual came, knocking at the door saying they will take my son from me, which they eventually did. I never saw him again. So I mean, when they say things, they actually then do them. They do them, yes.
Unbelievable. So I just want to dip into the disclosure problem that we're having in the States here. I didn't see the movie yet, Disclosure Day, but I did dig into the internet to try to get, a good summary based on it. But why do you think that we are not being told the truth? Maybe the government doesn't know the truth. Maybe they do. I don't know. Like you said,
No.
God knows.
No. My book, as you know, brings you all the details about, first of all, the Catholic American screenwriter and director David Coep, who did the screenplay and who added all these Catholic elements to the whole narrative. Then, of course, I explained why Steven Spielberg is a gatekeeper. I mean, he's been always a gatekeeper. After he did the first film, Jaws, basically they knocked on his door, naval intelligence, and from that moment onwards, he became a gatekeeper. So but in my book, I explain all that, his connection with the mega group of Les Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein. So we're talking about a guy who is not a saint in any way, shape, or form, but also somebody who is connected to the Chabad Lubavitch movement, which is part of the Sabbatian Frankist problem, which I expose in my book on Epstein. So regarding the government goes along with the Vatican in covering up the whole thing because they are using, they are reverse engineering, and the actual first reverse engineering program dedicated to UFOs was Italian. It was actually called RS-33, the cabinet led by Guglielmo Marconi, appointed by Mussolini after the recovery of this UFO that was brought to Montesorate. And then eventually, after the end of the war, Pius XII, like it was also confirmed in recent times by David Grush, back-channeled it to the OSS, the CIA, that became the CIA, and was brought to America for reverse engineering. The reverse engineering then led to a special appointment by the Vatican of James Francis McIntyre. James Francis McIntyre was he died in 1979, but he was apparently called when the Roswell crash occurred. He was apparently, some say even when the Trinity crash occurred a couple of years earlier. And then we have James Francis McIntyre that apparently confessed all this to Corrado Balducci, who then related it to Bibolotti, who is this guy who this year, once again, when he was actually conducting the yearly conference in the Vatican, mentioned this whole thing. So we're not talking about simple speculation. This is Bibolotti in the Vatican this year. And this is also the page of a newspaper that is a very important newspaper in Rome connected to the Vatican, Il Tempo, which says, talks about this extraterrestrials back in Vatican. It's like the extraterrestrials arrive in the Vatican because of this conference they started. And a very symbolic one here by the Osservatore Romano, which is the official newspaper of the Vatican, saying the extraterrestrial is my brother. So we see this constant push from the 1950s, from 1952, when Washington started to have all those UFOs. The interest of the Vatican led to this progressive Jesuit Pierre Teilhard de Chardin to actually convert their theology to this hypothetical disclosure by adapting the Catholic faith. So no longer demons, no longer entities evoked by some grimoire hidden somewhere in the Vatican secret archives or whatnot, but instead a contact that actually is developed in a very aware form later on by a Pope John the 23rd, who was a Freemason, who during a Masonic session in the Rosicrucian degree in Istanbul, achieves this contact, and then later, while he was nuncio apostolico, so ambassador for the Vatican, later on when he becomes Pope, he actually has an encounter of the third kind in the Vatican Gardens with and this Castel Gandolfo place was made to almost retire and become a museum 10 years ago with Pope Francis, while instead suddenly now with Pope Leo XIV is back in fashion and is back as being not only the summer residence of Pope Leo XIV, but let's not forget, this is the headquarters of the Vatican Astronomical Center, the Specula Vaticana and the Jesuits. So the Pope apparently spends their time not only in the summer, but also in the winter. And I know that directly from people who work close to Pope Leo. So that was confirmed to me. And this year, when during Contact in the Desert, Danny Sheehan, who we know is also the lawyer for Stephen Greer, for Luis Elizondo, confirmed that he was contacted by Pope Leo XIV and that he will go to Castel Gandolfo. So, I mean, it's all connected. Now, going back to James Francis McIntyre. Now, McIntyre was somebody who actually was the auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of New York from 1940 to 1948, and then later on became the Archbishop of Los Angeles. But apparently, he was chosen to have this particular connection with the military-industrial complex and what we now call the legacy program. So McIntyre went with Eisenhower to meet these beings, allegedly when Eisenhower was here in Palm Springs and suddenly disappeared one day. And then later on when he met them also in New Mexico. So we have a guy who is actually a member of the clergy at a very high level, who, by the way, studied at the Cathedral College in Queens and then went on to the St. Joseph Seminary and was a friend of future Cardinal Patrick Boyle, Boyle, who was a very important cardinal of the Catholic Church, who became this kind of overseer of the whole process. The Vatican was not there simply passively overseeing the whole thing. They made a deal with the military-industrial complex as the only...
Are you talking about the Eisenhower thing? The Eisenhower event?
Not only that, because we're talking about a deal that's manifested from Eisenhower, but went on. It was to these days. I mean, the Catholic Church has been involved even with the study of Project Blue Book, as we know, in the 1970s with the Carter, who then gave Danny Sheehan the possibility. And Danny Sheehan was, let's not forget, Daniel Sheehan, who likes to be, you know, perceived as this disclosure guy. He's the biggest manipulator. And we're talking about a former Jesuit novitiate. Now, there's only one way: you leave the Jesuits and then become for 10 years the head of their the legal representative of the headquarters. There is only one way: if you become, like I explained in volume 12, a fifth vow Jesuit, meaning somebody who publicly might be a lawyer, a public speaker, a political activist, an educator, but in secret relates everything directly to the Jesuit general.
So, because we didn't talk about that connection yet. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's why I want to ask you, for folks that don't know, what's the connection with the Jesuits? And you speak a lot about them in your book, explaining. Give us a quick overview. What's the connection?
Think about it. Christopher Clavius. Was this, I mean, he's the guy who created the modern Gregorian calendar. So, I mean, and he did it, of course, being an astronomer, aside from a Jesuit and a mathematician. He had to be an astronomer because that, you know, this, imagine the influence the Jesuits have, as they were
Yeah.
leading the way from the very beginning in the astronomical sector in the Vatican. When Ignazio Loyola in 1540, and then the 1540s with the Council of Trent, became suddenly this new order came out of nowhere, because up until that time there were a group of friends who in 1530 went to Montmartre, this mountain in the middle of August, and then gave birth to this order. But Ignazio Loyola had been arrested several times by the Inquisition. He was himself accused of being a magician, an occultist, somebody who hypnotized young girls and all kinds of things. So you want to give this guy the possibility of heading a new religious order? Well,
Yeah.
it happened because the Pope realized that he needed experts on the occult, experts on science.
Sure.
And at the time, astronomy, astrology, science, they were all merged together. It
All
wasn't like
together. Yeah.
so compartmentalized like today. And so from that moment onwards, then they became the counterintelligence of the Vatican, the main intelligence unit. In 1560, they gave birth to what is known as the entity, which is the official Vatican intelligence. So they not only, and then in Rome, they founded their college, Collegium Romanum, and they gave birth immediately to their astronomical observatory. So it was natural that the Jesuits will take over the astronomical section of the Vatican, sector of the Vatican. But there had been a problem. The Jesuits had been kicked out of the Vatican for a period of because in the 1770s, nobody wanted them anymore. All the various Catholic kings, Portuguese king, Spanish, they were all complaining to the Pope. The Pope at that point said, okay, that's it with the Jesuits. And they survived thanks to the protection, paradoxically, of the Orthodox Church in Russia and of the Empress of Russia. So that is quite, and also thanks to their link with the Sabbatean Frankists, who were starting to manifest in Ukraine, Poland, and in those areas. They kind of, their colleges and their institutions stayed untouched in that part of Europe, in Eastern Europe. So the Jesuits eventually, when they went back into the Vatican, were not the first choice as astronomers. They were amongst the fold of various orders that the Catholic Church welcomed into the fold for inaugurating what Pope Leo XIII calls the Specula Vaticana. To this day, that is the Vatican astronomical sector. And but it was in the 1930s, and this is kind of very indicative, after the UFO crash, that the Pope gives the Jesuits complete control again of the astronomical sector of the Vatican. So under Pope Pius XI, that's when they also moved to Castel Gandolfo, because the light pollution was too much inside Rome, so they could, for their observatory. And but so there had been that moment in time in which, in the 19th century, the famous Jesuit astronomer Angelo Secchi ran one of the major observatory at the Roman College, and he made some pioneering work on stellar classification, which is still respected today. So when people say the Jesuits, we're talking about the astronomers, that some of the most respected astronomers in the world. NASA employs them to map planets.
I was just going to ask you that. Yeah. Is there a connection to NASA and the Jesuits today? So they're still actively involved?
Absolutely. Especially since the Jesuits then, when they saw that the light pollution was arriving also in Castel Gandolfo, they moved very aggressively to take on Mount Graham in Arizona, which then, after they established a very important observatory, led to the birth of another observatory by a consortium of universities that, led by the Heidelberg University in Germany, also controlled, even if not formally, by the Jesuits. So in 1978, we have the arrival of George V. Coyne. George V. Coyne George Cohen is a guy who is very much connected with SETI. He's part of the SETI board.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So SETI is from the very beginning was taken over by the Jesuits because of the important relevance of it. And then you had before him Patrick Trenor. But George Cohen was rather fascinating because Cohen stayed in charge for 28 years, which is very unusual. They usually have to leave their job after 10 years. So it's like, limited amount of time. Instead, he stayed for 28 years. He was very close to John Paul II. And he was very ambiguous, as I explain in my book, in the way he operated, because at the time we didn't have the internet or immediate communication. Sure. So you could create a complete different narrative in the United States while you could continue in Italy saying, oh, we don't discuss UFOs. No. Well, instead he arrived in America and he was like making whole conferences on the subject. So this, and opening his conference discussing the novel of Carl Sagan that became the movie Contact, which was one of his favorites, and so on. And of course, we know that Carl Sagan was also a gatekeeper and also connected to SETI. But like I said, the arrival of the Jesuits after, because in the end of the 1800s, when Pope Leo XIII gave birth to this new endeavor of it was because the Pope wanted to show that the Vatican was scientifically ahead and wanted to stay that way in the age of the Industrial Revolution. Now, Pope Leo XIV has taken the name Pope Leo because he claims that he wants to be like Pope Leo XIII was for the Industrial Revolution. He wants to be the same for the age of AI and robotics, which is going to have the same effects. Now, we might, of course, be distracted by our daily lives, but what's going to happen in the next few years is a epochal transformation, just like the Industrial Revolution pushed millions of people to go towards the big cities and so on, and change the whole thing, of how life was conducted because people started to work in these factories and so on. So Pope Leo XIII, though, established this astronomic sector initially with the Barnabites, which are another important order, and even the Augustinians. It was one of the first director of this new Vatican appointed astronomical sector was a member of the Barnabites, Francesco Denza. Then there was Giuseppe Lais, who was a member of the Oratorians, and then there was a member of the Augustinians, which is actually the same order as Pope Leo XIV.
Wow.
But the Jesuits eventually took complete control of the situation after the sudden. So we had Barnabites, Oratorians, Augustinians, and Jesuits who were in the official Vatican Observatory all together. But then suddenly, when this UFO thing came into the fold, all other orders were distanced. And there is a reason for that, because the Augustinians or the Barnabites, they are not a military intelligence asset of the Vatican. They cannot have the same kind of loyalty. You see, when Ignazio Loyola 500 years ago got the Pope to accept this order, he showed the rules of the constitution of the order and said, we have 4 vows. Not everybody takes them. We have of course, the first 3 vows for those who want to be brothers, those who want to be also members of the clergy. But then you have a 4th vow. And the Pope said, what is this 4th vow? Is the vow of complete obedience to the Pope, meaning that the Pope can tell him to murder somebody, even that goes beyond the Catholic faith or the Christian faith.
Sure.
It has nothing to do with religion. It's a blind obedience to the Pope. No other orders have that kind of obedience. And the only ones who had that kind of military background that was effective before the Jesuits were the Knights Templars, but they had been eliminated 2 centuries prior to that, to the acceptance of the Jesuits. So they had something missing there. And in the meantime, you have Martin Luther, the Church of England, the birth of the, and things were seemingly getting out of control. So that's when the Jesuits come into the fold, and they become also these very knowledgeable astronomers that could be used also to exchange information and become, let's say, traders of hidden knowledge or with distant lands. That's why the Jesuits eventually were immediately sent to Asia, end up in the court of the Chinese emperor, and they brought their knowledge of astronomy in exchange for their Chinese knowledge of other things. And for the last few hundred years, the Jesuits have been in China. And actually, if you go and ask the AI if a Chinese space program would have existed without the Jesuits, they will tell you no. Without the Jesuits, there will never have been a Chinese space program. Not because the Jesuits are directly formally involved nowadays, but because of the long history that really goes along. So
the Jesuits don't have an affiliation today with the Vatican, or do they? Is this still connected?
Well, the Jesuits, after they came back into the Vatican in 1815, after the death of Napoleon, they gradually retook control, and eventually we had with Pope Francis the first Jesuit Pope. So a complete takeover of the Jesuits happened, like I explained in volume 12 of my Confessions, with the Second Vatican Council, which was this pivotal moment that happened in the first half of the 1960s. And by the way, in my latest book, I also explained how the Pope, who had that contact experience in the lodge, then as soon as he arrives in the Vatican, gives birth to the changing event in the history of the church. It seems a bit strange. And then after that encounter, he gives the kickstart to this pivotal event for the history of the church, which is the Second Vatican Council. That's also very strange, but it's not that strange once I explain it in the book, because we know that they are leading the potential one world religion in time for disclosure. That is really what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, what is that? You mentioned this death ray, and that there were specific documents or forensic analysis of the Vatican archives that supported some kind of claim in 1933 of a UFO crash.
The forensic analyst that okay, at the end of the 90s, what happened was that these documents are actually documents, official documents of the Italian Republic at the time, of the Italian monarchy, because Italy was a monarchy at the time, of Mussolini. These documents demonstrate that Benito Mussolini gave orders of absolute silence to all the journalists. These are official documents that were sent starting from the end of the 90s until the beginning of the year 2000 from a mysterious source. This Mr. X then turned out to be the grandson of Benito Mussolini. And not only the grandson of Benito Mussolini, but the son of Galeazzo Ciano, who was killed by his father-in-law. So, because he betrayed the father-in-law, and then ended up, of course, being killed because of that. But apparently, these documents are not only regarding, and you can, of course, view them in my book, they're not only regarding the 1933 UFO crash, which is, of course, this one in particular, but also regarding all the various UFO sightings that followed in the years, especially between 1933 and 1936. It seems like after the specific UFO crash that happened in northern Italy, then it was almost like it triggered a UFO interest on the whole area, because they probably wanted to recover their own UFO, so they started to fly over Venice, over Milan, and all these UFOs that were seen, of course, were then reported in official documents and became what are known as the fascist X-Files. Now, David Grush, when he came out as this whistleblower in 2023, he mentioned the Mussolini UFO and the Magenta Vergiate crash. But for us in Italy, for me, who worked with Roberto Pinotti, was all news because we knew that Pinotti and Lissoni even published a book in the year 2000 about it. And later on, in the last few years after David Grush then brought back the whole thing, and of course Pinotti was then interviewed by the Daily Mail and other mainstream media gave him the attention he deserves, because he is very much a professional when it comes down to search of extraterrestrial intelligence or non-human intelligence. His experience was also a very direct experience, because it started with an interest which was led also by an event that everybody in Florence talked about in 1954. Now, I showed these UFOs over St. Peter's, but the week before that, the same UFOs were also observed over a soccer match in Florence. And during this soccer match, suddenly they stopped. They were forced into stopping a game, which in Italy is like stopping a mass, because for the Italians, a game of soccer is almost a religious experience. So imagine that in Florence, suddenly people were no longer watching the game, but they were watching these UFOs all over the place. And then I think the day after, also the American ambassador viewed them in Rome. And after a few days, they were also viewed over the Vatican. So there was a lot of UFOs at the time over Italy, also over France. This was the image of President Eisenhower with the ambassador at the time, who was a woman. Here it is. This woman here, who was Claire Booth Luce. I hope I spelled the name right. And she was reporting of having seen them herself. So, and then, of course, there were articles in the newspapers in Italy, you can see, with UFOs all over Rome at the time. So it was a very felt thing. That led also to Adamski then arriving in Rome. And apparently, George Adamski then was also able to meet the Pope who had that encounter in July 1961. This is actually Adamski with Alberto Perego in Trastevere in Rome. And then this is also an image of Adamski and Alberto Perego giving a conference also in Rome. Of course, due to the controversial nature of Adamski, you can imagine that people were not taking really seriously the whole thing, because somehow George Adamski and the whole topic were seen in the wrong way. Let's not forget, it was actually the American intelligence, the OSS, and then the CIA who forced this narrative upon the people to simply debunk the whole thing and say it's a fraud, there is nothing to see here, let's move on. That was the policy that they adopted, and they did it from the very early 50s, also with Project Blue Book.
Yeah. You talk about the gatekeepers a lot in your book. Who exactly, for folks, so they can understand, who are these gatekeepers? What's their main objective?
Well, I mean, I've mentioned Denis Sheehan, I mentioned Luis Elizondo, I mentioned David Grush. People might not know that, but David Grush is a Catholic, a very devout Catholic. and he very much relies on people like Pasulka, who Professor Pasulka. It's a woman who in the last few years has been all over the UFO media, but she is basically another gatekeeper that was appointed and blessed after by Guy Consolmagno in the Jesuit headquarters, and one of the few people, to my knowledge, that have access to the Vatican archives, which are almost impossible to access. I mean, I was lucky enough to have Alfredo Lissoni, who is, of course, the guy who wrote with Pinotti the book on the fascist UFO, who had the possibility of going there. But both Pasulka as well as Lissoni, when they went and studied the UFOs in the Vatican archives, by the way, it's 53 miles of archives under the Vatican. It's never going to be an easy journey also to go through all this information. But Lissoni did a very vast research in the early 2000s, late 1990s, with the excuse of researching Christian legends. While Pasulka instead claims that she was able to go there while she was researching for a potential saint and a beato, I mean, the beatification of a guy and the sainthood of another. So she was, but these people, when I say gatekeepers, they are gatekeepers who are, of course, benefiting from the information that comes from the Vatican or the military industrial complex. In fact, just to give you an idea, Gary Nolan and Professor Pasulka were blindfolded and brought, as we know, because she said it herself, she wrote it in American Cosmic in her book, and blindfolded and brought to a crash retrieval site where they found evidence. And that after that, she, with this other guy called Taylor, who apparently was also working for the space shuttle, and ended up going into the Vatican archives. So all these people have a connection and also have privileges that normal people don't have.
Yeah.
So I was able, and I want to clarify this point, to actually have access to the gatekeeper's world, thanks to a guy who is obviously very close to them, who is Roberto Pinotti. In fact, Roberto Pinotti last year was invited as a special guest to the Soul Foundation. Now, people don't know what is the Soul Foundation, but I explain it in my book. It's an organization which is a front for the CIA.
Jeez. I wanted to ask you about, we talked a little bit about David Grush, right? Him and Jake Barber have this Skywatcher program, co-founded by Jake Barber, I believe. And they're doing this research where they're using telepathy to...
Well, I think that program didn't really go forward because there is too much interest to keep it as a secret access program and not a public program. That kind of intervention apparently is typical already of the remote viewers in China, in Russia, but also in the United States since the early 1970s, remote viewers that got in contact inevitably with non-human intelligence, and apparently the governments then used them to lure in these UAPs, UFOs, however you want to call them, so they could then reverse engineering them. So the fact that today we have somebody like Trump who doesn't want to give us the entire truth is because, of course, the interest of the military industrial complex is to keep the reverse engineering topic completely silent. Even if, of course, David Grush is there acting as the guy who is telling us some truths, but then we don't get the confirmation because they will never give him that confirmation. At the moment, it seems like the interest is to keep everything within the frame of national security, and that's it.
So are they only releasing footage that they approve and want us to see? Like, I think Jake Barber released
lights in the sky. I mean,
that egg he released, that they were capturing this egg-shaped entity.
Regarding that is with the Skywatcher project in particular.
Right.
Yes.
But it seems like every month Trump is releasing some type of footage
but it's very much soft disclosure. It's not anything
it
definitive.
is soft disclosure. Yes,
we
absolutely.
might, though, notice that the psychological operation around it is ongoing. I mean, when you have the involvement of somebody like the Dr. Phil who interviews David Grush, you know that, of course, the whole thing is a great theater play. I mean, Dr. Phil, guys, come on. It's not really the UFO expert you might expect, but it is the kind of voice that will prepare the masses psychologically.
That's what they say. I also heard that they recruited about 1,000 priests from different churches, the government we're talking about, and that they prepped them on how to talk to their people to prepare them for UFO disclosure.
Let's not forget that in my book I already showed the guy, Father Resch, who was preparing for a long time with a couple of special courses delivered in 2 of the Vatican universities. He died earlier this year. He is the guy who confirmed he's been preparing the clergy to deal with the extraterrestrial phenomenon with contact. So this has been ongoing for decades. It might come out now, maybe surfacing because, of course, things have started to manifest. But let's not forget that the Vatican has been working behind the scenes since the 1950s, but even before, since the 1930s, because the moment in which they got involved with the first UFO crash, that was the change, let's say, the turning point for the Vatican. Because then you see, after the Second Vatican Council, you had the change of the church, the adaptation of something that will manifest more and more as the basis for a one-world religion. But then prior to that, we have a Catholic Church that, of course, has been transforming itself along the lines of this disclosure. So it's all kind of going, and then we have Freemasonry, which arrived with the end of the Second World War to establish 4 lodges in the Vatican, and with those 4 lodges in the Vatican, prepare also the majority of of course, of the clergy that counts in the Vatican, not the ordinary secular priest that you average Jesuit that you might find that is not even a 4-bow Jesuit. I'm talking always about higher level members of the Vatican clergy.
What evidence does your book present for the Zecharia Sitchin alleged hidden collaboration with the Vatican interest? Wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the collaboration with the Vatican was confirmed in front of the cameras of Genesis 6 when me and Timothy Alberino did the documentary together in Rome 10 years ago. And at the same time, Gianmario Feramonti, who we interviewed in that occasion, also gave us a series of photos, him and Zecharia Sitchin. They were old friends. And then this came after the encounter between Sitchin and Corrado Balducci, who then started to exchange apparently, and this was confirmed in front of the cameras of Genesis 6, but also to me personally, because I know Gianmario Feramonti, he said that they exchange exotic artifacts, let's say, between Sitchin and the Vatican.
Right. Do you believe, getting back to the Eisenhower thing, that there was such an ET entity which was called Valiant Thor, and he was like this?
I can't, I can't confirm things which I don't have direct experience, or I don't have a document that can. One thing though I can confirm is that definitely this collaboration also with McIntyre was an important element of the story. And strangely, when I launched this book, something happened, because one of the first interviews was with Laura Eisenhower, and she reacted very good initially to the whole thing, but then suddenly she was not on board, and she flipped. She didn't want to upload it on her channel, and apparently
maybe they got to her.
What's it?
maybe they got to her.
They definitely got to her because it was really weird, you know. And in fact, after I uploaded it on my channel so that people can have a look at it, but of course, my channel has been suffering for decades. I have been censored, have channels removed left, right, and center. So it doesn't have hundreds of thousands of followers like she has. But what happened was that she sent me a mail after that was particularly revealing regarding her decision. And it was about the family name, the fact that Eisenhower was a good man and that he would not have done something that would have compromised him. And it's almost like she wanted to justify what happened. I mean, what people like Laura needs to understand, and with all the respect, she's a great granddaughter of President Eisenhower, is that any president is a guest, a mere guest for a few years. And we go back to your initial question regarding why these politicians are not so relevant, because they are only temporary. Those who have a real security clearance of high level are the people in charge of Lockheed Martin, the people in charge of the Stanford Institute, like Al Puthoff, who collaborated with Russell Targon on what later became known as Stargate Project. Those people have a higher level of security clearance than the actual president of the United States.
That's crazy.
Because the president, like I said, is a mere guest. And so he is given only on a need-to-know basis. That's it. It's not, you know, you don't need to know more. That's it.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting when you hear them talking about all these black operative programs and like billions of dollars go missing. This is where they're going to these agencies that we don't know about. And they're the ones that are, I think, funding a lot of this too. You know, these black op programs that we don't know. I don't even think the president knows about them.
No, the president, listen, the president knows, but at the same time knows very well that if you don't want to end up with like JFK, you need to just go along with what they tell you. I mean, JFK didn't go along and he ended up, in fact, being murdered. Yeah, so it's pretty clear that even JFK might have had himself a direct involvement with these beings and with the whole disclosure thing, because that's what happens. I mean, the president has the possibility, of course, of knowing certain things, but he also knows when to stay silent for his own security.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a few minutes left. What does disclosure look like to you in this current state? How disclosure?
Well, let's just look for a moment who are the people involved with this legacy program, which is often mentioned but rarely discussed in detail because nobody seems to have any form of concrete confirmation. But basically, the legacy program, which inherited everything that the Nazi fascists did in this sector, is operated by the Central Intelligence Agency, the United States Air Force, and the Department of Energy, which is, of course, inheriting what the Manhattan Project started, and which also triggered a lot of UFO, UAP activity, as we know, especially in New Mexico. So the legacy program then has, though, at the center, the defense contractors. Now, who are the defense contractors of today? Peter Thiel, Elon Musk.
Absolutely. Palantir, yeah.
I mean, these people, of course, will come to know the truth, but will also shut up and do their own dirty things behind this. Like, for example, Peter Thiel has now Jesse Michaels as a friend with American Alchemy. He kind of like, he does his spook work for him with this young guy who goes around, Jesse Michaels, with all the respect, because he might have a lot of interesting topics to discuss and a lot of interesting guests. But this was a guy that came out of nowhere, and suddenly his first guest was actually David Grush.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have to understand that when, for example, you said, who are these gatekeepers? Well, the gatekeepers that we have in the last 10 years are of a different nature from the ones that we maybe had previously, because at the end of the Obama presidency, like I explained in the book, then we have the involvement of John Podesta. John Podesta was trying to get Hillary Clinton to do the disclosure, but then when that didn't happen without her being elected, then he gave to Tom DeLonge and Al Puthoff the possibility with the Academy of the Stars. And so it's all connected. And then you have Luis Elizondo, who is, of course, this typical puppet, just like David Graff. They're puppets, and people seem to enjoy the show.
They are. But I wanted to show everybody the cover of your book. Of course, I'm on the last edges of it and I can't wait to finish it. Highly recommend it. It's everything you want to know and even more. What are you working on now, Leo, that you want folks to know about?
Well, I'm working on promoting this book as well as the other books, which I've done in the last couple of years have been particularly prolific. So I'm also leaving my brain to rest for a little while before maybe undertaking another work. But it's going to be, of course, something that picks up always from the 12 Confessions of an Illuminati and extends in a more profound essay. However, to this day, I still don't know the topic because I haven't made my mind up. I have a couple of ideas, but I don't know exactly where I want to go. So I can't give you an answer.
It'll be amazing. I hope that you can come back because I still have a ton of questions from this book that we didn't even get to today. I would love to invite you back.
I want to thank you. I also broadcast this on my channel because your line of questioning was very much down to the point.
Thank you.
Because you really have read the book and understood the importance and the relevance of what is written. And that doesn't happen with all the interviewers. I often have interviewers that just can't be bothered to go through the books that I write.
Then you guys, you have no idea what you will be reading in this book. It's mind blowing. I mean, I've got 1 million Post-it notes and underlines. It's amazing. That's why, Leo, I really would love for you to come back because I still have 2 pages of questions we didn't even get to.
Oh, well, it will be my pleasure in the next few months and keep on reading. And hopefully the next interview is going to be even more illuminating. But this one was a great one. So thank you so much to you and your audience. God bless you all. To the Ethereal Encounters Unveiled, it was a pleasure.
I will be in touch. I'll send you some dates, Leo.
Okay. Thank you, Caroline. All the best.
Dear friend. Bye-bye. That was amazing. Thank you, everyone in the chat. You guys are amazing. I hope I didn't miss any of your questions, but do post them on YouTube because we're going to have Leo back, and I will absolutely make sure that we get to ask him those questions if I did miss any. Sometimes it scrolls fast and it's hard to catch them all, but please do post them in YouTube. You can find me on Ethereal Encounters Unveiled on YouTube, and I will definitely make sure. So much love to everybody. Thank you so much. You guys, you really make my heart feel wonderful. Your comments are great. I love your presence. Thank you all so much. Have a blessed and wonderful weekend. You all deserve everything, happiness and more. Blessings. See you guys next week. Take care. Bye-bye.